Good morning and good afternoon to in-house counsel from all across North America, in-house counsel and legal professionals from all across North America. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I'm the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your lunchtime with us, and special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, Summize, and our fantastic panel today, featuring Susan Roberts, Brandon Tatum, and Jonny Jessop, who will teach us key considerations when evaluating CLM solutions. CLM is a very hot topic in legal departments across the country, and I'm very excited to hear what they have to say. But first, this is our 58th event of the year, and I'm wondering, are you here for the first time, or have you attended an IHC event before? It looks like we have a 70-30 split. That is 70% returning and 30% are new. So welcome to the 30%. Welcome back to the 70%. And let's get to today's presentation. CLM fundamentals for in-house counsel, key considerations when evaluating CLM solutions. Our panel features Brandon Tatum. Brandon has over 15 years of experience using CLMs and currently serves as the general counsel at SM Kakao Entertainment America. Our next panelist is Susan Roberts. She has over 20 years of CLM experience and is the corporate paralegal at Nsight. And last but certainly not least, our final panelist is Jonny Jessop, who is a software nerd and a solutions architect at Summize. Again, great panel. Very excited to have them on with us today. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Jonny to get us started.
Thank you very much, Shai. Lovely to see everyone here. Today, we're going to talk about CLM fundamentals. Really glad to have Susan and Brandon here to help me. Here is all of us. You can look us up on LinkedIn after the session if you want to connect, do a bit of networking and get to know more. And here's the agenda for today. So what we'd like to do is start off with some pain points and some horror stories. We are a month out from Halloween, so maybe it is appropriate to start talking about horror stories, particularly when it comes to CLM. But we're going to look at those challenges that cause you to want to find a CLM solution. And then we're going to look a little bit more holistically about what to consider when evaluating the solution, more from a kind of business perspective. We'll be discussing between us what areas are important for your business, how to collaborate, how to engage different departments in that search for a CLM and what's important. I'll be giving the kind of software vendor's point of view, and Susan and Brandon will be very much on your side, sharing their experiences from looking for CLM solutions and implementing them. And then we're going to go into the software side of things, which I'll lead and look very much at the solution and its components. What should you consider? Now we're going to break down the solution by contract creation, review, and management. And we'll be talking through some kind of nuts and bolts things to consider along the way. But we're going to start with a poll. These are kind of typical pain points, challenges that you might see when you're looking at a CLM solution. So if you vote in the poll, have a read through, and then we'll discuss, Susan and Brandon, what are most relevant and have been most relevant for you two throughout your careers.
And I'm going to chime in and let you know that this is a multiple choice. People can choose more than one pain point. When I was making the poll, I said, there's too many good pain points here. Just limit it to one. So let it be more reflective. So keep that in mind.
I think what we can already see from the poll show is there's very few that are already solved. I think we've got some clear winners, and that is the challenges themselves.
So it looks like I don't have a template structure for aligned position is not a pain point. To cross that off, it looks like, storage is a problem. It looks like contract intake process is inconsistent as a problem. Manual review of contracts, too much time is a big one. And last but not least, lack of data and insight on contract KPIs is also a pain point.
I see. So, over to you, Susan and Brandon. Susan, if we go with you first. I know from previous discussions we've had around storage was and has been a huge issue for you. If you could elaborate about some of those horror stories.
Sure. When I first joined the company, one of my first tasks was to find all the contracts in our company and load them up into our contract management program that they had purchased. It was a task because individuals had their own contracts stored on their individual drives, and there was a SharePoint site where they were supposed to be shared, but they weren't. And then we had paper contracts stored in the basement of our building, and it was a nightmare. So I started from scratch and just went to every single source I could find, met with all of the leaders. We have about 750 employees. And so I tried to meet with all the directors and gather as much information as I could. That was a pain point for us as well. To this day, I don't know if we found all of them. I think we have, but I can relate to that pain point very clearly.
Absolutely. Thanks, Susan. And Brandon, what about you?
In terms of storage?
Well, in terms of what would you say is the biggest challenge? I mean, you've been in the business a while, so throughout your career, what has been the kind of biggest headache that you've had out of this list, do you think?
My biggest headache has certainly been the intake process and the challenge that I've had around particularly working in the music industry and people being kind of informal in a lot of ways in business, submitting contract requests to me over any number of methods, including email, of course, text message, Slack messages, different chat tools like WhatsApp or Kakao out of Korea. And so having contracts come into me via so many different methods, it's very hard to keep track of and to follow and to respond in a timely manner. Sometimes people would send a contract first via email and then also via Slack or HubSpot or any number of tools. And it's like, guys, I can't keep track of 10 different methods of receiving contracts. Please send them all to me through email only, which never happened. So, one of my main goals with getting contract management solutions was, guys, this is how all contracts flow through. And it's also easy for you to make a request through the different APIs that you're locked into with the company like Slack, Summize.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we speak to different businesses every single day, and intake seems to be more key now that commercial teams are moving quickly, even quicker. Like you say, you're getting phone calls at the dead of night from internal customers in a different region. Everyone, I think there's a lot more focus on intake than when I first started this job. Before, it was very much around contract review. But yeah, I think it's super important. We'll have a look at that from a solutions perspective later on. Thank you.
And Jonny, before we go on, I would just want to know, Susan and Brandon, can you tell us a quick bit about?
Sure. Nsight is a smallish telecommunications company in northeastern Wisconsin. We do business in Michigan and Minnesota, but generally that area of the country. We have fixed and wireless options and a very small legal department, my attorney and me, but we are support for every other department in our company.
Awesome. And Brandon?
Yep. SM Kakao Entertainment is really a joint venture between two of the biggest entertainment conglomerates out of South Korea. So SM Entertainment is the pioneer of modern K-pop music, and Kakao Entertainment you can think of like the Amazon of Korea or the Tencent of China, that sort of company. It's a big internet and entertainment media company and technology company. So they're both publicly traded in Korea.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Back to you, John.
Cool. So next, if we're looking at a CLM based on these pain points, and I'll put this out to both of you, what's important? Now, we've got some suggestions here, and I think really it depends on what your initial objectives are and how they align with company objectives when you're looking for a CLM solution. Common ones we see when businesses come to us looking at CLMs are stuff like collaboration. Sometimes, and I'd be interested to see if this resonates with either of the two of you. Often it's about improving legal's reputation within a business and getting legal more front and center into that negotiation process. Are those things that either of you have come across before?
Certainly. A lot of times I found that business will, take many steps in a contracting or building a partnership process and bringing legal in sort of last minute and expect you to catch up, whereas it would be more efficient and effective to pull you in much earlier in general.
Definitely.
We have the same problem, I guess, because we have so many different people in departments working on contracts, and they seem to only want to speak to legal if a glitch arises. And then, like Brandon said, you have to go back to the history and try to figure out where it started, what drafts of the document have already been passed back and forth. So just trying to align everybody in the company with the same, thoughts about how to proceed with these things is hard.
Absolutely.
I've also found that sometimes various departments or people in these departments have a certain level of trepidation when dealing with legal. And, sometimes legal departments get the reputation of being the department of no and telling them what they can't do, whereas they want to do things regardless of the risk profile. So I found that can be a reason why they don't reach out to you sooner, because they're afraid of the early no. So, yeah.
I see. And then that links on to the right-hand side here. So when you're looking at a CLM solution, I mean, in my role, I get lots of RFIs in from, big companies looking at several vendors. We set out a list of requirements, and it's quite clear a lot of those requirements come from different areas of the business, and they're not all necessarily from legal. There's commercial influence there as well, and it can be quite interesting to understand what different priorities are. But from a business perspective, what is the best way of engaging the wider business in order to get those requirements in the first place? What does that look like?
Susan, you want to go first? Yeah.
Sure, I'll try. I mean, there are always a handful of people that are really excited about getting legal involved and working with us on getting a contract done. And so you don't need much buy-in from them. It's the other ones that we have to work with. Even like Brandon talked about, having a central spot where all the contracts should go. We've had that in place, and very few people really implement that. So I think just trying to get the buy-in to the culture of how it all works is super important. And really for us, being able to show them the benefits of handling contracts the way that we would like them handled, that's then it's a little bit easier to get the buy-in. But there's just so many people working on it that it makes it really difficult.
Yeah, I agree with that. Showing them the benefits have been the sort of most effective way I've seen. Like, most good business people I found like to work efficiently, and explaining to them how the existing processes really slowed down and bogged down the legal department, which is why you have extended turnaround times on your review requests, starts to drive home a point once you show that actually, if we're using this sort of tool, it will actually speed up the process and even provide some self-help mechanisms that will allow you to proceed without having to go through legal at all, which would be great on standard sort of contracting processes that legal does not need to be particularly involved in at each stage.
And I'd like to add to that, having a spot where these business users can go to find out the status instead of, constantly calling and emailing and wondering, what the status is. So that's a real benefit.
Yeah, I hate status check emails. just fills my inbox with nonsense. Yeah.
Yeah. Understood. I think that's really helpful. I think it's also from, obviously we're involved in a lot of kind of CLM purchase processes. I think it's also important to understand where the budget is coming from and what departments are involved in, really what departments have skin in the game. I think from an implementation perspective, we'll look at this in a little bit more detail later on, but I think it's almost what's worked well in a couple of projects that I've been involved in is having whether it's a commercial department, a region, etc., as your kind of key users from the start, going, right, we'll design it for you, and then we're going to pivot it to other areas of the business. Yeah. And then they feel really involved from the offset, and you'll get really good positive feedback loops started right at the start of a software project. And that's the same whether you're implementing legal software or any real type of software. But I think that's quite important.
Definitely.
That's good. Let's keep going. So we've got another poll for you. We'd like to understand, obviously we've got 50 odd people on this. So do you have a CLM? It'd be good to know. What's the current situation? Oh, a lot in the no camp. I expected most people to have a CLM. I see. Less than 10% have and like their solution, which is a little bit sad, but I guess that's why we're here, Shai.
I'm surprised too. 57% of people on this chat or on the Zoom do not 58% don't have a CLM, which is very interesting. I wonder people, so I dropped a question in the chat. It's a question I'm interested in digging into myself. Where does the budget come from in your organization for a CLM? Susan and Brandon, I'd be interested in hearing like what your experience is in that regard. And Susan, I'll start with you. Like, does the budget come out of legal? Is it a shared service? Is it, a different one?
It comes out of legal, and we have a CEO that makes the final decisions about those budget items. But I will add that in our case, when they first decided to implement a CLM, there was we didn't have to really convince anybody of anything, because being in the telecommunications industry, we manage a lot of cell phone towers. We own a lot of cell phone towers. We rent space on cell phone towers. And a lot of those contracts have automatic renewal clauses in them, which will lock us into a 5-year renewal. And what was happening prior to having a CLM was that they were being renewed when we didn't want to. So we ended up paying 5 years worth of rent somewhere. So when the company first decided to go to a CLM option, they didn't have to really fight too hard to get that in the budget.
Yeah.
And it's proved to be very valuable ever since. So.
Yeah, for sure. Brandon, is that consistent with your experience?
Yeah, totally consistent. It's a legal department budget, but the CEO and the CFO approve of the spend.
Yeah, of course. And thank you everybody for participating in my question. It looks like legal budget is pretty consistent, but I would say, the CEO, CFO, everybody gets to bless and approves that before it goes final, before the ink dries. Interesting. Donald said it's corporate funded since it's a shared tool amongst many different business units, which is great. And I guess just to recap the poll, it looks like we have 11, or I'll share it. 11% yes, and we like our solution. Yeah, but we're not sure we like it, but it's not sure if it's long term. Yeah, 18% are like, yeah, but we want to replace it, which is not an option there, but it's an option in the poll. And 57% are like, nope, no CLM to speak of. So I wonder, out of the 50%, the 57%, I wonder what's your holdup in getting a CLM? Is it simply budget, or maybe there's another reason? So tell me in the chat. But back to you, Jonny.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated to know that, Shai. Obviously, a lot of the businesses we're speaking to are in the hunt for a CLM and have already come to that decision, but obviously there must be a lot that are not. So put your answers in the chat. It'd be really good to hear. Okay, so now we're going to look at CLM components, a bit more of a kind of practical, technical look, which is why I'm here. So we're going to start with template management and hopefully get some advice from the panel around how to manage templates. I've come up with a few ideas myself to start with, which we can discuss. So for us, when we're looking at a project, to start with, if it's any kind of generation use case where you're heavily using your own paper, maybe it's a large business with good bargaining position, or maybe something you sell is quite unique and it's not covered by a counterparty's paper. But we normally separate it into kind of 3 areas. First being legal design and making sure that your templates make sense, they can be understood by the people that are trying to get them signed. Next, kind of the approvals and workflow process. And then one thing we believe is very important, obviously, is where they should be available and where that kind of entry point, that accessibility is. I know both of you obviously been involved in CLM implementations. Are there particular things you have to remember about templates when you're preparing them, doing elements of legal design? How do you make a template make sense, I guess, is my question to both of you.
I think first getting the understanding of where you have room to budge in your contract templates. So I like to prepare contract playbooks maybe I shouldn't say like to prepare, but it's valuable to prepare contract playbooks and to be able to understand the different positions on different terms in our standard agreements that we're willing to be flexible on and to what extent, so that I can build that into the template as we're preparing it.
And for us, in our industry, there's a lot of standardization of contracts. So it makes sense to have some of those standard contracts, accessible to the internal users. They don't necessarily need to get legal involved until everything's ready to be reviewed. But we do have a lot of marketing, sponsorship agreements, the standard NDAs if they want to use our forms. So for those, it's quite easy to decide which templates that we want to utilize, because there's a lot of standardization in our company.
Yeah, that brings me, to be fair, onto the next slide, Susan. So that's a similar process that we go through. I mean, I've separated here in a really simple flow. I mean, normally we see there are templates, and I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, if this reflects what you're looking at, where you've got templates that are owned by legal that probably have to be, used predominantly by our lawyer, and kind of those sister templates where you probably need some commercial input as well, but they're mainly, more kind of legal centric, as opposed to those more standardized contracts that can probably go straight out to the business, either just be automatically generated or generated with a line of approvals. And do you go through this kind of process where you almost put your templates and your own paper in different buckets and look at that from a process perspective?
We do. Like you said, a lot of those are self-service, like the NDA, that our standard NDA doesn't change except with respect to the parties that we're dealing with. And actually most of the other type of tower contracts, so those don't really change, except, if we have specialized language we need to add to any of those. But I mean, for us, it's kind of the same bucket, because, we're a smaller company and only dealing with a small amount of the types of contracts that we utilize.
What about you, Brandon?
On the music publishing side of our business, we have sort of more standardization and consistency, and so we're able to be a bit more self-service on that side. But on the recorded music side of the business, where we're dealing with major record labels and buying songs from producers, that takes a bit more collaboration, and the contracts vary so much that usually it's not self-service, unfortunately. Yeah, it's just not practical, and there's a level of trust there with our business team getting it right that we just can't risk, because small changes can make a big difference in these agreements.
I see. I mean, it obviously depends on how you're contracting and what that process is. I mean, what we do from a software perspective, I mean, we look at everything in quite a binary way. It's either this or this, and then we put it through a process. But I think it's also important, whatever vendor you're looking at, whether it's us or anyone else, you've got flexibility in those workflows, and make sure that they're not too fixed, they're not too rigid, and that you can deviate if needs be. I'd just say that's vitally important, no matter what business you're in. In terms of a process then, Brandon, yeah, something there. From a design process, so what I wanted to show you, just kind of the process we go through when we're looking at contracts from a legal design point of view. So, I mean, this is kind of a template condensing exercise. So you might have a couple of templates. The example here is with whether you're appending a DPA to an agreement. It's a case of making sure that you've got, instead of having 3 templates, having 1. And regardless which software vendor you go with, if you make sure that that kind of a template evaluation at the start is kind of front and center to your process. Brandon, I can see you nodding. Is this the process you've been through, trying to condense the amount of paper you have?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in companies where we have so many different versions of an NDA, and they never standardized it. It would be great to be able to compare and pull out the best parts of them collectively.
Yeah. We get it a lot when we're dealing with multinationals with different jurisdictions, and they'll have the same contract for different territories. And in reality, there's a little bit of variation, but it's not huge. They should really be in one master document. This is the process we go through. Next, it's all about kind of accessibility. So, I mean, we believe in the concept of the legal front door here at Summize. It's quite big for us, front and center of a lot of things we do. But really, all that actually means is that whoever your internal customers are engaging with legal from an area they're comfortable, from somewhere that, whether it's Teams, Slack, Salesforce or something like that. Where have you seen most success with collaboration? I know, Brandon, you get contacted on basically every platform going, don't you?
Yeah, Slack has been great. The Slack integration, I think, is really good. When I was at SoundCloud, we used Slack heavily. Also, when I was at a company called Gala Games, we used Slack. That was the main mode of communication. So being able to accept contract requests via Slack and have it pre-populate an agreement for the business, especially those standard agreements, is super helpful.
Yeah. What about you, Susan? Have you seen a rise in virtual office use like Brandon?
Well, I would say we're a little behind the times because our group loves to use email for everything, for every request that they make regarding a contract or wanting an NDA. And so just getting to the point where we've decided that we would use Teams as a way to exchange information through our Summize program. That's been wonderful, again, because everything's in one spot and everybody can check on to the extent that we allow them to, to look at their own contracts. We're kind of just coming around out of the old email age. So it's pretty new for our group.
Yeah, I think it's important to be flexible as well. I mean, some people are always going to want to contact you by email, aren't they? I think the main thing, as much as us as a software vendor, we'd love everyone to use, an integrated system. I mean, people still do like to email. So it's making sure that all of those requests end up in the right place. What does this actually look like in the front end? So if I may, I want to show you the joy of a contract being created via a Teams front door. So, we have a system we like to implement called the legal front door, whereby we're seeing quite a lot of success with this. There's a lot of companies migrate to the virtual office, but you'll see here on the screen, this is just a contract being created via a Teams interface. And so my message into this isn't really actually, go forth and seek out Summize. It's make sure that when users are generating contracts, when you're providing templates out to the wider business, it's somewhere that's accessible for them and that they can engage with. Whether that, for you, that might be SharePoint, it might be, some CRM system that you currently use, or it might be a legal front door through Teams or through Slack, like Brandon's reference. But yeah, make sure it's somewhere the business are comfortable with, because that way they're most likely to adopt it. Okay, Brandon, your favorite subject, contract intake.
Yes.
All the emails and text messages. I've broken this one out as well. So the way we see this, and I see this, is that the review process is very, very different depending on the type of request that's coming in, depending on which lawyer the request is going to. Businesses tell me every day of horror stories of, normally it boils down to salespeople writing FYI and forwarding on an email blindly, but it can be a myriad of different approaches. But I think one of the key points in tackling this is studying who your reviewers are and what that review process looks like, focusing on the tooling that you're using for review. And then, Brandon, you've talked a lot about standardization across the board, particularly with your playbooks. So what does that look like for you? So what was the process of building those playbooks?
Typically, it involved looking at multiple of the same type of agreements that we've negotiated and identifying where we've chosen to have flexibility, and then discussing with the C-level team, okay, we're okay actually accepting this range of difference in the terms that we're using. And then it's just about putting those into a matrix and then introducing and socializing that with the business team so that they understand, and also reaching out to them and getting their input. Because a lot of times I find that the business team even though they say they review the contracts, many of the team members don't actually understand what has been agreed. And taking them through the process of a contract playbook and looking at the alternative clauses makes them feel more empowered and more like they have an understanding of exactly what they're agreeing to in these agreements and what range they're happy with. So that's been the standardization process for playbooks for me.
Susan, what about you? Did your business get involved in reviewing agreements with you? And you said not everything goes to legal.
Well, honestly, it should in the end, and we're hoping to get everybody on board with that. I don't think that most of the people that are sending us contracts for review care to know what's in the contract. They just want legal to take on all the responsibility and let them know where there might be some pain points to consider. And like for us, we have to think about budgetary constraints, what the standard industry charges are for certain things. But I just have found that for the most part, they don't want to know what's in that contract. They just want us to take care of all of that for them. So the burden kind of always ends with legal in the end.
I see. So for Brandon, for your process, it's more about kind of enabling the business, and Susan, for your review process, it's more about making that legal side most efficient as possible, because you're going to be, at the end of the day, the people that are reviewing it. I think that encapsulates a lot of people's review process. There's always kind of different moving parts and different priorities depending on what your processes are and what type of business you do. I mean, I've got some basics here. These are normally the questions we go through when we're trying to scope and help a business evaluate what they actually need. And it's real basics, and it's important to write down. I love basics in software scoping. Really simple lists. Who sends you contracts? Why do they do it? How do you triage? You've got a team of generalists, or you've got specialists in different areas. How involved, and we discussed this just now, are your internal customers in that process? And how involved do you actually want them to be? Would them being involved, like in Brandon's case, benefit you? Or do you really want them as far away as possible and, just for them to get the end result? And then other departments as well. If you do complex reviews and you're relying on finance, compliance, other areas of the business to rubber stamp a contract before you come in, how are you going to engage with them? And this is kind of a running theme throughout this presentation today of understanding that. And then approvals, who needs to, to officially give that rubber stamp. I'm going to show you a little bit of software now for the intake process. We believe the legal front door obviously is very closely linked to the virtual office. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a contract request coming through Teams. In actual fact, Teams is one option. You could depends really where your requesters are coming from. So it might be a Salesforce makes sense to you. You might want a really good email process coming in, or it might be SharePoint. I've spoken to a few businesses recently that have a really refined process in SharePoint with different forms. It's up to you. It depends what makes sense. I mean, we believe in Teams, but that's not necessarily the right answer for every single business. So make sure that's addressed as part of the scoping process when you're looking at CLM vendors. And don't always think that everybody is going to be willing to log in to another separate solution, because a lot of the time at the wider business, they're not. And that is why a lot of CLM projects do fail. Review and negotiation here. This is all about playbooks. So what you're seeing on the screen are a few different types of playbooks. Brandon, you mentioned your matrix. Is this like an Excel piece of wizardry? How did you put it together from a practical perspective?
That's exactly what it is. It's an Excel wizardry, pulling out not every term of a contract, but the key terms, the most negotiated elements of the agreement that we need the business to be able to decide if they want to give this counterparty the flexibility on those terms. The rest of the terms should never change. So that was the process, finding those key provisions in the different agreements and then going through that process I described earlier.
I see. Is it more kind of, is it workflow centric in any way? As in, right, here's who needs to approve, here's who you need to escalate to, here's a response to go back on email, or is it more kind of drafting notes for the actual negotiation?
That part was drafting for sure, except to the extent that if you make a change sort of outside of the parameters, then there were approval levels and approvals that need to occur. Yeah.
I see. It's interesting. Like, we see some incredible playbooks working at Summize, and a lot of them businesses bring to us, some of them partners put together, but I firmly believe that's the route to standardization. And I think playbooks will become something a lot more kind of normal over the next kind of 5 years or so, and everybody will be working from them. Susan, do you use any kind of playbook at all, or is there plans to put something in place?
The clause library is important to us because there are certain things that we're always looking for. We have certain states that we don't want to, apply the governing law to, and so we like to use a clause library to find the different options. That would be our most common mode.
Yeah, that's kind of often all a playbook needs to be, depending on what the situation is.
Pretty soon, AI will be able to take all my agreements and create, the most epic playbook ever from those agreements and really pull what's best for us. And I don't have to do it manually. That'd be nice.
But you'd want to check everything before it went out, I imagine.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, generative AI is, I mean, I know, Shai, you've got a session about this by the sounds of things next week that I might join. I find it absolutely fascinating. But yeah, the facilities are available there with generative AI to create these kind of things for us and to, potentially analyze everything that we're currently obligated to and we're currently signed off, and then use that to overlay into the business decisions. But yeah, I think that's one for another day. I don't think we've got time to introduce generative AI at the end of this, but thank you both. Lastly, Susan, I know this is your specialist subject, storage, how to find contracts. We're going to ask you a question though to start with, and please answer honestly. As a poll for everyone, where are your contracts? If we asked you today to find a batch of contracts, where would you go?
Today, you can find them in our contract management program. It was all different years ago because, like I said, they were scattered about paper, SharePoint, somebody's private drive, So that was one of my first tasks when I joined the company, try to centralize all of our contracts. And we've gone through CLMs since I've been here, learned a lot, trial and error about what we needed. We didn't know what we didn't know in the beginning. So we thought we just needed a repository to put everything in one spot. But then we, as it evolved, I just needed to have a lot more capabilities to set tasks and reminders. Hopefully now everything is in one central location so we can put our hands on it anytime we need to, but that's also dependent on our internal users providing us with the contracts that we may have generated and we didn't have any access to.
Did you have like a contract amnesty? You said, give us everything that's in your Outlook folders, in your local drive.
It kind of was that way. It was really, it was overwhelming at first because I just kept getting emails with 15 contracts attached to each email. And it was a nightmare to go through. It took over a year just to gather everything. And then I had to scan things. And it was just, we had 18,000 documents in the end that came to me. So yeah, it was a bit overwhelming. So it's kind of comforting to know that they're all in one spot now.
Yeah.
I wonder for the lawyers here and Susan, for those who use outside counsel and have versions going back and forth with external counsel, I feel like sometimes the contracts, certainly for us, I have to say, are stored with outside counsel, and we may not even have a copy on our systems, which is a big issue. It's crucial intelligence that we don't even have in our system. So,
well, I agree. One of the reasons why we went to a CLM in the first place was because we were looking at ways to cut our outside counsel costs. And so we thought there was a lot that we could do internally, which is why there was very little buy-in needed from our CEO and CFO for purchasing such a program. But you're right, because to this day, if there are contracts that were handled by the outside counsel 10 years ago, I'm still going back to them looking for those because they didn't give us everything.
That's right. Yep. And sometimes the outside counsel was shifted to another firm in that time. They couldn't take all the files with them, and it's still back at the previous firm. It's just a hot mess. Total hot mess. Yeah.
I want to chime in. So a couple of things, folks. We have had wonderful participation in the chat. So thank you everybody for your participation. For the 140, 150 people sticking around, that's wonderful. If you have questions for our panel, please put it into the chat. A lot of golden nuggets are in the chat box. So thank you again for participating. I want to add, for companies that acquire other companies, that's another huge pain point, to find their contracts, to put it into the same CLM, to extract those terms. I was at a company that bought 3 different companies, and it was a nightmare to get all the contracts aligned. So that's another pain point and an interesting area of value for CLMs. Turning to the poll, it looks like for the most part, we can find our contracts. It might not be easy, but it's doable, I guess. So 35% have them in a CLM, 45% have it in a cloud storage platform, and 15% have it all over the place in various online. It's somewhere in the cloud, I guess, or maybe in not the cloud. I don't know. And then 5% have no idea, which, is a pretty good number. So thank you everybody for participating. Back to you, Jonny, for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised. It's good. It's a shot in the arm for your SharePoints and your boxes of the world that I'm sure you're all using. I would be interested to know, if you put in the chat, how well especially your business users and your internal customers use that online storage system. Also, who owns those contracts that are in SharePoint or in Box, and how do you police that from a legal perspective? Put your comments in the chat. Good to find out. Just one last bit to go through. We've already discussed a lot of this already in terms of where are your contracts. It's the most basic one. Susan's gone through it, making sure that you can get all the contracts from your business, and then where do you put them? Who do you make available? Who do you make your contracts available to? And how do you track those ongoing obligations? And then from a reporting perspective, what kind of regular reports are run? When was the last kind of, DD reporting request you had to do on all your existing contracts? That's a good budget point as well. If you're looking at trying to justify the return on investment for a CLM product, cast yourself back to the time that you the last time you had to analyze all of your signed contracts for a particular piece of information. That can be really key. That's one of the biggest kind of time drains that we see in terms of helping you secure budget in the process. I've written a bit of a to-do list here for you. These are just some of the things from software implementations that we see. There's always arguments about folder structure. Lots of businesses are very precious about folder structure. So if you already have one and people already like it, try and replicate that where possible in your CLM, just because it will make it more familiar for your business users especially. If you can understand which departments need to have access to what before you start, it's always good. Basic kind of to-do list questions, but it is quite important. Who's responsible ongoing and how actively you're actually going to manage your obligations that you have. And then, reporting, which types need to be reported on regularly. I've got 2 little bits of software to show you just to end this presentation, and that is good ways to find contracts. Now, hopefully this is the case with any CLM you're looking at. Obviously, I'm a Summize expert, so I want to promote my own, but this is an example of being able to find a specific clause from a contract with a certain party. So the vendors you're looking at will likely have AI solutions, and it's important that you make sure that those can find different key terms within contracts. And that information is pieced together. So those regular kind of questions you're getting from the business can be answered really quickly. And then the wider reporting, once you've got all your contracts in a repository, understand what kind of filters you need, what kind of due diligence reporting you need, what kind of format that needs to be in. Are there going to be users that aren't part of your user group with software? Are they going to need to receive spreadsheets, automated reports? What is going to be necessary for them receiving that data and analysis? And that's really all we wanted to show you. So we're going to open up for questions now. I hope there's plenty of questions in the chat. I can see it's been very busy.
Yes. So first question, can you talk about the different use cases for what info is in the CLM? I guess somebody dropped in the chat that they don't want that NDAs should not be a part of the CLM. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And what it would be interesting to hear from Susan and Brandon. What are your most used contracts in the CLM? So I guess Susan, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, we're sort of the master repository for everything. So we tend to get everything, and a lot of it isn't really even a contract. It's just some document that supports a contract, or something else, tower drawings or something like that. People tend to send us everything. but we have the folders. We love utilizing the folders. So you don't, and honestly, we're the only ones that can see legal right now. We're the only ones that have access unless we assign a particular agreement to a user. And we will, if they're the ones that are asking for the review, we'll always allow them. But there's so many things in there we don't want anyone to see. We don't want people just having the ability to dig around in all the contracts in the company, because we have a lot of really confidential things in there as well. But I personally love utilizing the folder system. So I don't, I don't have to look at every NDA or I could just do a search based on a company name too and find that. But I particularly love the folder system that we utilize.
Brandon, any insights into the types of contracts you use for CLM? Do you keep NDAs in there? Like, what's your typical practice?
Definitely keep NDAs in there. All contracts, all executed agreements are stored there. I wouldn't segregate NDAs for our company. And like Susan said, a lot of contracts are very confidential and we can't have everybody gain access. I mean, even you could have HR related agreements in there that obviously most people in the business should not have access to. But yeah, we use it for all contracts and attachments and everything related to agreements. And we also use the folder system as well.
Gotcha. We have a couple of questions about Summize specifically, but before I get there, can Susan and Brandon, can you talk about implementation? What was that like? And, do you have any tips and tricks for that? Because that could be a huge burden and, it's obviously necessarily evil, but like, how do you do it smoothly? And start with Susan again.
Okay. We've had some interesting experience with implementation. The first system we used was more of a repository and AI wasn't available then. It was good for what we thought we needed, but the more you know about what you need, then everything changes. So we went to another CLM. The implementation, I will say this, the people who are using the system should always be the people reviewing the various options out there. A lot of times decisions were made based on one person looking at a demo, but not necessarily the person that's actually using the CLM. So I found that I wish I had had more input with the implementation, but by the time we got to Summize, which is the program we're using now, I was fully engaged in the process of reviewing a lot of different CLMs, and because I understood what we needed the program for, what was most important to us, and it just made it so much easier because I had all the things that had failed in the last two programs. So I could ask really specific questions about what I was looking for, what our company needed the most, and having those questions answered and confirmed, because a lot of people will tell you they can do something, but then they really can't. And then it's too late because you've signed with them for 2 or 3 years. So we had some serious pain points in getting to the CLM that we're at now. So I would say for sure, let the people that are using it have some input in the implementation.
Got it. Brandon, you agree?
Definitely agree with that. And also think that the onboarding process, when you're first implementing a CLM, you don't actually know what you're doing, really. And so the CLM provider should have great guidance for you on how you should be onboarded and how you should start to populate the CLM and what are the best processes and steps to take, and even be able to speak with you and figure out who are the best people in your organization to be involved in the process as well. I think is super important when you're first learning and first maybe getting your first CLM implemented, and because you're not an expert right at that stage. And then Yeah, for me, I agree with Susan that the input from the business is important because number one, they need to like the user interface and get to know it. And secondly, they know, their business needs more than you do as the legal department. Certain things that they need, you may not understand that they need. So that communication helps with adoption as well early on. And then besides that, if your provider, your CLM provider can handle a lot of the process of legacy contract ingestion, that's a big help because you do not want to be dealing with that if you don't have to. It's a lot of time. You have to get your business, if you're a senior in the business or wherever you're at, you have to get the senior people in the business to agreed that you're going to take time out to spend time to do this implementation because it's going to take time away from you on a daily basis until it's really up and running. So that's another factor I found with implementation that needs to be understood.
And I'd like to add too, with the onboarding, that is such a big deal, understanding what the CLM is capable of doing for you and what they're not able to do for you. And I have just a little nightmare story to share about that, because the last program we used, I asked a lot of questions. I set tasks because I have to know, I manage every renewal for every contract we have, and I have to tell our internal users, hey, do you want to renew this or not? And then I reset my tasks. And so I had, thousands of tasks. And when we were switching over from one program to another, we wanted to make sure that we could pull those tasks over. I didn't want to have to redo everything. And they assured us they could, and then they didn't. So I had to go back and review every contract, every amendment, every addendum to make sure that I had the exact dates and renew everything. It was quite a nightmare. So knowing this going into our third CLM, it just made it so much easier because they could answer questions right up front. And I was always demanding proof that they could really do what they said they could do, because we just were so burned the last time. We just wanted to avoid that again.
And I want to follow up on this topic and talk about Summize. Was it easy to switch over to Summize? Like, what was that implementation like? Susan, I started with you a bunch of times, so Brandon, we'll start with you.
When we were exploring Summize at SoundCloud and then at Gala, there was no switchover because we didn't have we didn't really have anything in place. Anything we had in place, basically Summize integrates with. So that includes HubSpot, Google Drive, and Slack, for example. So that it was kind of smooth for us. I think it'll be the same for many companies because of the various APIs that Summize is able to lock into.
And I will say that the onboarding has been phenomenal for us with Summize. We were so nervous when we were just trying to decide which CLM to go with. And we went through a lot of demos and reviewed a lot of programs. And I found things that I really loved about many of them. And then we had the Summize demo and then the follow-up, and the hands-on assistance that we received and continue to receive is just so far and above anything we ever received in the past. And it took away a lot of fears that I had about getting a new CLM and implementing one. So I have to say that they made the transition so smooth and actually pleasant to go through. And I'm happy to talk about that with anybody that has questions. I've talked to other companies that were looking at various programs that we had reviewed and they had reviewed, and they were just on the fence about which way to go. So I've been happy to talk to different organizations about that, which I would do as well here.
So another question, Jonny, and then I'll kick it to Sandra and Brandon. How customizable is Summize? And a question for Jonny first. Does Summize integrate with vendor procurement platforms like GEP?
So it really depends what you're wanting to do. We are a customer-led business, as hopefully Susan and Brandon can testify to. So if there are particular integrations that you need that are important for your workflow, we put all cards on the table and we'll go through with your IT team what's possible, what's not going to be possible, and what benefit will be for you in your process, whether it's worth doing or not. Summize is very, very flexible as it is. It really depends on your attitude to CLM. If you are wanting to go big bang and have lots and lots of workflows in from the start, or if you're building up over time, or if you have a migration to do. Obviously, if the migration is very important, that's the thing we tackle first. But unfortunately, it's the politician's answer of it depends. But speak to us and we can properly scope it with you and go through in a lot of detail.
Yeah, I found that Summize, when I first demoed them, I liked everything that I saw. But one thing that I felt was not all the way there were the contract summaries that you could get from the system. I wanted to save time in summarizing agreements for business teams and executives. It takes a lot of time, and it'd be nice to have that be automated. And since then, Summize has built an incredible contract summary tool that's, it's the best thing ever. So many, and that's not like every CLM that I talked to and demoed, none of them had good contract summary solutions. So the fact that Summize was able to build that and make that happen was pretty awesome.
And that's one thing that I would like to add to as well, because they're so open to suggestion. That's an option. If you have something that you think will work better, they've made changes based on ideas we've thrown out there. And so they are very customizable. That's one of the things that we appreciate the most.
Awesome. 2 questions and then we'll wrap up. Does Summize offer any matter management modules? And can Summize create dashboards for metadata that is queried?
Dashboards, yes. So extensive filtering, depending on whether information is found in the contract or not found in the contract, or information you can add manually if you want to as well. It's up to you. In terms of matter management, it really depends what you mean. Unfortunately, we don't currently integrate with Outlook emails, which I know a lot of businesses want to pull across emails directly into the platform. That's something we're currently considering. However, you can attach any type of document to a matter, various different, whether you're adding in policies, addendums, etc., or just kind of contract files, images, you can attach that and use it as a matter management system. However, we don't have like a separate module for that, no.
Okay, cool. And then matter management?
That was the matter management side of things. So yeah, it really depends. So a lot of kind of classic CLMs have a separate matter management module. It's not something we do. You can use it for aspects of matter management, but it really depends what you're looking for. If you come to us with some requirements, we'll talk through with you and then we'll have a look and see if it's suitable depending on your industry. It might be that it is. If not, we'll try and point you in the best direction going forward.
All right. Awesome. So let's wrap up here. Thank you, everybody. Please be sure to participate in the survey form or give us your feedback. Sabrina, it's in the chat. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, for your wonderful participation. Thank you, Summize, and our wonderful panel. I'll kick it to our panel for closing remarks. Brandon, I'll start with you, then Susan, and then we'll finish with Jonny.
Closing remarks. Thank you all for joining. First of all, we appreciate you all listening to us. I'm sure you're all experts in your areas, and it's an honor to be able to present for you. Honestly, I don't understand any organization with any scale not having a contract management solution, an affordable one, suitable for their business. It just helps avoid a lot of risks, keeps things organized, and makes your job easier for legal. And it's often on us to sort of push for solutions to make our job easier, because the business often isn't thinking about what makes legal's job easier. They see us as a cost center usually, and they don't want to add additional costs by adding solutions that they have to pay for on an annual basis. But like I saw mentioned in the comments earlier, being able to show the CEO and the CFO the benefits, including the financial benefits that could result from using the CLM, is kind of the way to get it over the hill. So I would strongly recommend Summize. I've looked at least 10 different solutions carefully and demoed them. A lot of them say that they can do everything from start to finish of the contract lifecycle. The fact is that when you actually dig in there, they can't, or their user interface is incredibly frustrating, and nobody wants to use it. Summize has a very user-friendly interface, and the support that you get from the team is top-notch. So I would definitely give them a look. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It's been a privilege as well to be a part of this panel. It's been really fun meeting with other organizations. I was surprised by the number of organizations that don't use CLMs. In fact, we had a conference with a professional MBA team, prominent in the NBA, and I was shocked to learn they didn't have a CLM in place, and they wanted to know about our experience with Summize. We're with Summize, as you may have guessed, but apparently it is pretty common, and I can't even imagine operating without one when you have so many different contracts flowing through a company. I'd like to make a pitch as well for Summize, simply because I've seen a lot of other products use a lot of other products, and while they serve the purpose that I thought we needed at the time, there's so much more that a CLM can offer. And besides everything that Brandon discussed, because I agree with everything he said about that, I also will add or reiterate that Summize is so intuitive. The fact that it was designed by a lawyer, makes it kind of a big deal, because so many of these are designed by maybe IT departments or somebody that doesn't understand the needs of a legal department. And in fact, it was funny in the beginning, because I would ask a question about, how to do something, and it was so obvious that I missed it. It was so intuitive and so logical. I actually missed it because I was looking for little secret ways to find something or to do a report, and it was just right there and obvious. I should have seen it, but it was too obvious apparently. But yeah, I would say that I agree with everything Brandon said with regard to Summize.
Awesome. Thank you, Brendan and Susan, so much for being here. And Jonny, I guess, final word, close this out.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, further to Susan's point, for those who don't know, Summize was developed by Tom Dunlop, who's a former tech GC. We often joke in the office that it is a collection of things that annoyed him as a lawyer being solved in a product. Glad our customers feel the same. But yeah, we are lawyer-led. All I'd like to say just to close this is thank you very much, Susan. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, all of you, for allowing yourself to be in the presence of such a software nerd for the last hour or so. If you want to find out more about Summize, I believe we have a QR code here. Hit me up on LinkedIn or go on our website. There's lots of lovely people ready to talk to you. Thank you.
All right, awesome. So we will wrap up here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This was a wonderful program. Again, thank you to our panel, Susan and Brandon and Jonny and Summize.